The plane touched down just as the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the Seattle skyline, casting a rose-gold haze over the glass buildings. Maya Carter pressed her forehead to the cool window, breathing in a quiet sigh that held both hope and fear. At 27, she had left everything behind: the familiar sidewalks, the familiar voices, the familiar hands that knew how to hold her when the world felt too heavy. Seattle was different. The air was quiet here, as if even the wind whispered with caution. Her suitcase wheels hummed across the airport floor, a sound sharp enough to echo her own heartbeat. This was it, the job she had always dreamed of. The one her professors said meant something. The one her mother had prayed over the night she got the offer, kissing Maya's forehead and whispering, "Go be the woman God showed me in a dream." Maya repeated those words now, beneath her breath, almost like a shield. The office building where she'd start tomorrow was made of nothing but mirrored glass, sleek, reflective, beautiful, and something else she couldn't quite name. A place where she felt she might just disappear if she wasn't careful. That night, she unpacked slowly, folding each piece of clothing like she was laying down pieces of herself, her ambition, her softness, her determination, the child she once was, and the woman she was becoming. The studio apartment was small, but it was hers. She sat by the window, watching the rain drop like tiny beads of memory down the glass. The Seattle rain didn't fall with anger. It drifted, quiet and thoughtful. Maybe this city will teach me something, she thought. Maybe I'll learn how to belong to myself. The next morning, the office tower rose before her like a cathedral of ambition. The lobby shined with white marble floors and chrome elevator doors, so polished you could see your own reflection perfectly. Everyone moved with a silent, determined purpose. Their footsteps were soft, their smiles polite but hollow. She adjusted her badge on its lanyard. Her palms were warm, her heartbeat steady. She wasn't nervous, not exactly, just fully awake. The glass elevator carried her upward. As the floors ticked by, she watched the city shrink below her feet. It felt like rising into a world where the air was thinner and the expectations were heavier. The 32nd floor opened into a workspace full of clean lines, white desks, and screens glowing like small constellations. Her new coworkers looked up briefly, offering smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, smiles that said, "We already know each other, but we want to look polite." A blonde woman approached, thin, sharp, polished, as if she'd been cut from one of the glass walls herself. "Hi, you must be Maya," she said, her cheeriness perfectly measured. "Not too warm, not too cold. I'm Carolyn. I'll be showing you around." Maya smiled back, a genuine, open, hopeful smile. "Thank you. I'm so excited to be here." Caroline nodded, her eyes quickly scanning Maya from her hair to her shoes to her skin, so fast it could have been imagined, but Maya felt it. People always think they're being subtle. As they walked, Carolyn explained, "We value professionalism here. Communication is very intentional. We try to avoid unnecessary emotional tone. Clean, clear, efficient. You'll get used to our style." Maya nodded, though something tightened quietly inside her chest. They passed clusters of desks where people typed with straight backs and flat expressions. It was quiet, not a peaceful quiet, but a controlled quiet, as if all emotion had been carefully ironed out of the air. At her new desk, a small welcome card sat waiting. "Welcome to the team." No name, no signature, no warmth, but Maya smiled anyway, because she was here. She had earned it. As she logged in, the city stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. It looked distant, beautiful, and completely untouched. For a moment, she felt suspended, caught between hope and something darker she did not yet understand. The day passed in soft, formal conversation and silent observation. No one asked where she was from. No one asked if she needed help or wanted to have lunch. They spoke around her, not to her. Their smiles were like glass, smooth, transparent, and easily breakable. That evening, as the elevator doors closed, Maya saw her reflection again alone in a box of mirrors. She whispered quietly, so no one but her could hear, "I belong here." "I do." But even as she said it, the city lights flickered below, as if they knew the truth before she did. This place would not break her quickly. No, this place would cut softly, slowly, like the sharp edge of paper, like whispers behind glass, and pain that comes quietly, is the kind that sinks the deepest. The next week settled around Maya like a mist-thin, almost invisible, yet always there. The office looked beautiful from the outside, modern, respectful. Inclusive posters lined the hallways with phrases like, "We value every voice and diversity drives innovation." Bright colors, smiling faces, hands of different shades held together like a promise. But promises can be printed, framed, and hung on walls without ever touching reality. Have you ever felt like you walked into a room that was supposed to be for you, but somehow it wasn't? Let's talk about that. It started small. During her first team meeting, Maya sat with her laptop open, hands resting lightly on the keys. The conference room smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and coffee. Conversations floated around her weekend hikes, new breweries, family ski trips, topics she could smile at, but never stepped fully inside. The manager, Mr. Thomas, stood at the front, tall and thin, with a calm smile and eyes that never stayed on anyone too long. "Let's brainstorm ways to improve our data pipeline efficiency," he said, his tone as smooth as polished stone. People spoke in turns. Ideas were tossed lightly, casually. Maya had a strong one, something she had used successfully in her previous job. She waited for a natural opening, then spoke, her voice steady and warm. "I actually have a suggestion that could reduce processing time. If we restructure the input mapping." But she didn't get to finish. Alex, a pale guy with a beard that looked carefully unkempt, spoke right over her. "Yeah, we should definitely restructure the input mapping. I've been thinking the same thing." The room nodded. Mr. Thomas smiled at Alex. "Good idea." Maya just blinked. She wasn't invisible. She was right there. Her voice was still hanging in the air. She opened her mouth, maybe to continue, maybe to reclaim what was hers, but Carolyn touched her elbow lightly. Almost friendly. Almost. "We try not to interrupt," she whispered, smiling. As if Maya was the one who had broken the rule. Maya nodded slowly. Something inside her folded, not broken, just folded. At lunch, she walked to the cafeteria. People sat in clusters, coworkers, friends, work families. Laughter drifted in soft waves. She searched for a space that felt open, but all the tables looked full in that way that means not available. So she sat alone, opened her container of leftover pasta, scrolled through her phone just to look occupied. She felt eyes on her, sometimes curious, polite, assessing, but no one approached. She thought maybe she was imagining it. Maybe every new person feels this way, until she heard a voice from behind. "She's really quiet." A whisper, not bothered, not cruel, just casual. "Yeah, I can't tell if she's shy or just, I don't know, hard to read." Another voice said, followed by soft laughter. "She's probably just trying to figure things out. Or maybe she's not a fit for the team culture yet." Culture. That word again. Soft, gentle, harmless looking, but inside it was. Maya took a slow, silent breath. She didn't turn around. She didn't respond. Instead, she remembered something her grandmother once said while shelling peas on a porch in the summer heat. "Some battles ain't allowed, baby. Some battles walk quiet, wearing silk shoes. But they cut just the same." She hadn't understood it then. She was starting to understand pieces of it now. The days passed, and the cuts continued. They weren't obvious wounds. They were 1,000 tiny paper cuts that nobody else could see. There was the compliment that wasn't a compliment. You're surprisingly articulate. The suggestion disguised as advice. Maybe soften your tone in emails. It reads a bit assertive. The joke said too lightly. I bet your hair changes every week, huh? Followed by laughter. But Maya didn't laugh. Then there were the actions. A meeting she wasn't invited to. A project reassigned without any explanation. A conversation that would pause when she entered a room and resume only after she left. Nothing big. Nothing you could write down in a report or take to HR without sounding overly sensitive, dramatic, or emotional. It was the kind of racism that doesn't need slurs. It just needs silence. It thrives in the unspoken, in the spaces between words. One evening, as she was packing her laptop to leave, she caught Mr. Thomas laughing near the elevator with Alex and Caroline. They didn't see her. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. She's smart, Alex said. No question. But she feels intense. Mr. Thomas nodded slowly. That's the thing. She's competent, but she might not be the right culture match. The team's dynamic is delicate. And then Caroline added, her voice soft, thoughtful, almost kind. We should give her time. But if she doesn't adapt, it may create strain. Adapt, strain. Words like velvet draped over stone. Maya stood perfectly still, her hands wrapped around her bag, the strap digging into her palm. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed it down. Not here, not in front of them. She waited until the elevator doors had closed behind them. Only then did she let her breath shake. Just once. The city outside was dark, the lights glittering like thousands of small, distant promises. The rain had returned, soft and familiar now. She stepped out into it, letting it touch her without fear. And she whispered, her voice barely a breath, I see what this is. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. There was no fire, just truth, soft but sharp, like a blade made of quiet. The winter came early that year. Seattle's sky dimmed into long stretches of gray cloud that made every morning feel like evening. The rain didn't fall in big, dramatic storms. It whispered, a soft, endless tapping against the glass that never stopped, like someone gently knocking, asking to be let in, asking to be heard. Maya felt that same gentle knock inside her, too. The office, she learned, had its own subtle rhythms, patterns of who talked to whom, who walked together to lunch, who shared inside jokes without ever needing to explain them. Maya watched these patterns the way you might watch birds migrate, knowing that some deep instinct tells them where to go, but somehow not knowing how to feel a part of it herself. She tried. Of course she tried. One morning, she brought in pastries from a fancy bakery near her apartment. Too expensive, really too pretty, but sweet enough to share. She placed them in the break room with a small, neat note. Morning treats, enjoy. Maya, she imagined someone would smile. Maybe say thank you. Maybe, just maybe, ask her to join their table for lunch today. But when she walked past later, she found the box open, half empty, crumbs scattered on the counter. Laughter floated across the room, warm, shared laughter, but no one looked her way. No one said her name. The little note was gone, probably tossed away with the used napkins. She stood there for just a moment. Not hurt, not even angry. Just quiet. As if her heart had decided to sit in a corner inside her chest, instead of right there, in the center where it belonged. Work became a place of motion without meaning. She arrived early, left late. Her code was clean. Her reports were detailed. Her suggestions were thoughtful. But praise never seemed to find her. Instead, feedback came wrapped in a blanket of professional concern, delivered in gentle phrases that felt like soft hands pushing her aside. You might want to watch your tone in meetings, they'd say. It can feel a bit direct. What she heard was, say less. You're very passionate about your work. What she heard was, you're making us uncomfortable. You may want to be more patient before offering ideas. And she heard, wait until we're ready to hear them from someone else. And so, she did speak less. Not because she agreed with them, not because she believed them, but because exhaustion has a sneaky way of sounding like acceptance. Silence is heavy when it's chosen for you by force. It was at her desk that she felt the distance most acutely. People would laugh around her, their voices skipping lightly like stones over water. But their conversations would always break around her, like waves parting around a rock. Once she tried to join a group near the coffee machine. The smiles froze. Shoulders tightened. A half-finished joke died in the air. "Oh, hey," Caroline's voice cut in gentle, practiced. "We were just talking about something work-related. Nothing important." But their eyes said something else entirely. "This space isn't for you." Maya just nodded. Not because she accepted it, but because sometimes nodding is just easier than falling apart right there and then. She returned to her desk. The screen glowed. The rain tapped against the window. The world kept moving. But something inside her had just stopped. The nights were the hardest. She'd lie in bed, the soft hum of the city a constant presence below her window. She'd scroll through messages from home pictures of family gatherings, her mother's Sunday dinners, her cousins laughing in living rooms where she used to belong, voices she missed, hands that had held hers, walls that didn't make her feel so small. She could have called. She almost did, so many times. But how do you explain a wound that has no bruise? How do you say, they are so kind to me, and also, they are hurting me, and then add, and I can't prove either? Instead, she whispered into the dark, I thought I was strong enough for this. A single tear slid silently across her cheek and disappeared into the pillow. No sob, no shaking. Just a quiet grief. And you know, quiet pain is the most loyal kind. It stays with you. It settles in. It learns the exact shape of you. Weeks passed like this. Then, one afternoon, something broke through the quiet hum of the office. She passed by a huddle of coworkers near the printer. They didn't see her. They didn't lower their voices. She's just so intense, one said. I never know how to talk to her. I know, right? She just stares sometimes. It's uncomfortable. Do you think she's angry, like at us? No, I think that's just how her face is. A small, soft laugh followed, but it cut deeper than any shout could have. Her face, her silence, her very being was the problem. Maya turned away before they could notice her. She walked to the restroom, found an empty stall, and locked the door. She sat down on the closed lid, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She took a slow, controlled breath. This time, the tear didn't fall. This time, something inside her didn't break, and it didn't shatter. It sharpened. She saw it all with a sudden, piercing clarity. It wasn't her tone. It wasn't her silence. It wasn't her fit. The problem was that they simply could not imagine her belonging there. Not because she wasn't enough for them, but because, in her own way, she was too much. Too present, too brilliant, too real. Her existence was a quiet testament that their world was smaller than they pretended it was. And they couldn't hold that truth. When she stood up, her reflection stared back at her from the mirror. Her eyes were steady. Her shoulders were squared. The softness was still there. She could see it, but it was no longer unprotected. She leaned in and whispered to her own reflection, You don't shrink here. Not for them. Not again. Her voice didn't tremble. For the first time since arriving in this city of gray skies and glass buildings, Maya felt her heart return to the center of her body, and it was wide awake. That morning, the office felt brighter than usual. The sunlight was almost aggressive, pouring through the windows, casting a golden sheen over everything, the white desks, The silent keyboards, the focused faces. It was the kind of day that looks gentle on the surface, even when the undercurrents are anything but. I was at my desk, headphones on, putting the final touches on a report. This wasn't just any report. I'd spent 2 solid weeks on it, meticulously cleaning data, charting patterns, and writing conclusions with surgical precision. I had worked late every single night, skipped more dinners than I can count. This report mattered. It was the foundation for a partnership pitch with a major client, a deal that could bring in millions. My analytics were the core of it all. Caroline, my manager, hadn't reviewed a single line, but she would be the one presenting it. That's just how things worked here. I wasn't naive. I didn't expect a parade or even a simple thank you, but I held on to this small, perhaps foolish belief that good, hard work meant something, that effort in itself had value. Then, at 10:13 a.m., my email pinged. The subject line was stark. Need to talk. Meeting room 5B. My heart didn't even skip a beat. Not at first. I walked down the hallway, my steps silent on the thick carpet. When I opened the door, the scene was set. Caroline was there, along with 2 senior managers and an HR representative I'd never met. The air in the room shifted instantly, and I felt it before a single word was spoken. Caroline began, her voice as smooth and polished as her manicure. "We've reviewed the analytics report you submitted." I nodded. I was calm, confident in my work. "And we're concerned," she continued, her voice gentle but sharp. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. "Concerned?" I repeated the word softly, just to make sure I'd heard her right. "Yes," the HR rep chimed in. "Some of the data appears misaligned. The projections seem overconfident. The client won't respond well to inaccuracies." I blinked, just once, because I knew. I knew my work was solid. I had checked it, double-checked it, triple-checked it. I swallowed slowly and asked, "Can you show me which parts you mean?" Caroline clicked her mouse, and the report flashed onto the big screen. The moment it appeared, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't my report. I mean, the structure was mine. The charts looked familiar. The writing style was mine. But the numbers ... the numbers were wrong. They had been changed. Key findings were softened. The strongest conclusions completely watered down. My work had been edited, weakened, sabotaged, all without my knowledge. It was deliberate. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a sudden, chilling clarity. Caroline went on, her tone still so careful, so patronizing. "We know this may be a learning curve for you. These kinds of mistakes happen when someone is still adjusting to our expectations. It is important you understand your tone, and conclusions need to reflect the team's standards." I looked up from the altered document, my voice steady. The numbers were changed. A profound stillness fell over the room. It was that sharp, bright silence that happens when an undeniable truth has been spoken, and everyone is pretending they didn't hear it. "We made strategic adjustments," Caroline said finally, her voice losing a bit of its smoothness, "to make the findings less aggressive. You tend to..." She paused, searching for a word that sounded professional, but was actually a dismissal. "You tend to push too strongly." And there it was. The real accusation, cleverly disguised as feedback. "You're too passionate, too confident, too assertive. You are too much of ... yourself." This had nothing to do with my tone, or teamwork, or so-called professionalism. It was the same old story, whispered in every sidelong glance, every carefully constructed sentence, every smile that never reached the eyes. It was a message that said, "You don't belong here as you are." My hands rested calmly in my lap. My voice remained quiet, stripped of anger, leaving only the truth. The report was accurate before the edits. The projections were strong because the data supported them. Changing them made the conclusion weaker, not clearer. Caroline's smile tightened into a thin line. "See? That's what we're talking about. This. Defensiveness. This is why we're concerned. Defensive. The perfect word to use when you want to shut someone down for daring to explain themselves. The HR rep leaned forward, her voice sickly sweet. We want you to be successful here, Maya. We really do. But you need to be more flexible, more collaborative, less forceful. And I heard the unspoken translation loud and clear. Be less black, be less sure of yourself. Be less visible, shrink. My face remained a mask of calm. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't a crack of weakness, but a fissure of awakening. I finally understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. This was erasure. Soft, polite, professional erasure, but erasure all the same. Caroline delivered the final blow. So for now, we're removing you from the project. Just until we feel you're aligned with the team's communication culture. The words were a whisper, but they landed like a ton of bricks. I nodded once. It wasn't a nod of agreement. It was a nod of recognition. I stood up, moving with a grace I didn't feel. I understand. Carolyn let out a small sigh of relief, clearly thinking she had won, that the problem had been contained. But she didn't see it. She didn't see the new fire in my eyes. It wasn't a wild, raging inferno. It was focused, a controlled burn. As I walked back to my desk, the office hung along, oblivious. On the surface, nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. I didn't cry. I didn't feel a tremor of self-doubt. I just knew. This was no longer about trying to fit into a space that was determined to shrink me. This was about fighting for my place. Not just for me, but for every single person who has ever been told to be smaller, quieter, less, just to be allowed to exist. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started to write. Not code, not another report. I started writing the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the first shot fired in a war. The afternoon light dimmed into that classic Seattle gray, the kind that settles like a thin blanket over the entire city. Inside, the office lights hummed softly, a sterile glow that made everything look slightly washed out, as if emotion itself was being bleached from the air. I sat at my desk, my hands resting on the keyboard, but I wasn't typing. My mind was still in that conference room, still hearing the phrases they dressed up as concern, still seeing the edits that weren't mistakes, they were messages. I exhaled slowly, letting the breath leave me like smoke. I wasn't breaking, but I was changing. I could feel it, a subtle shift deep inside. Around 3:40 p.m., when the office was at its quietest, a shadow fell across my desk. I looked up. It was Jordan, someone I'd seen around, but had barely spoken to. He worked in DevOps, 2 departments over, always moved quietly, always watching, never intruding. He held a mug of tea, not coffee like everyone else, and his expression was careful, intentional. "Hey," he said softly. His tone wasn't cheerful, and it wasn't pitying. It was just present. "You got a minute?" I nodded. He pulled a chair beside my desk, not across from me, creating a barrier, but next to me. It was a small act, almost invisible, but it felt like pure gentleness. He didn't rush. He didn't pry. "I was in the hallway earlier," he said, his voice low. "Outside 5B. My chest tightened. He saw. He heard. My own voice came out quiet. How much? Enough. Silence sat between us, but it wasn't heavy. It was steady. A silence that didn't demand to be filled. Jordan sipped his tea, his eyes looking forward. "That wasn't a performance review," he said. "That was positioning. They're setting a narrative." I swallowed hard. I had suspected the same thing, but hearing someone else say it aloud made the ground shift beneath my feet. "A narrative?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. "Yeah." He leaned back slightly. "They don't need proof. They just need the story to stick." Difficult to work with. Overly assertive. Doesn't fit the culture. Once that's the story, anything you do becomes evidence to support it. My breath was slow, controlled. You've seen this before. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but in memory. I've lived it, he said. My first year here. Same tone. Same phrases. Same meetings. He paused and then added, same smiles. I looked at him fully then, really saw him. He had survived this place long enough to understand its shadows. How did you deal with it? I asked, the question filled with a desperation I didn't know I had. Jordan's eyes softened in a way that felt like truth being let out gently. I stopped trying to be invited, he said, and I started building my own ground. I found the people who saw me for who I am. Even if it was just one person at first, he gave me a moment to breathe. A moment to absorb that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't imagining things. It was real, and someone else had felt it too. He nodded toward my laptop. You're writing something. I can tell. I blinked, surprised he noticed. I'm documenting, I said quietly. Good, he replied. Keep everything. Dates, edits, messages. If they try to push you out, you'll need the truth to have shape. His voice held no panic, no rush, just strategy. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since I arrived in Seattle. Steadiness, ground, the sensation of no longer standing alone. The next morning, the office felt the same cold, glass clear, too bright, but I felt different walking through it. My spine was straight. My steps were measured. My presence was no longer muted, not louder, just undeniable. Carolyn noticed. Of course she did. She always noticed. She approached my desk with her usual polished poise. Good morning. Quick reminder, we'll need you to sit out of the partnership prep meetings for a while. It's just temporary. I smiled a soft, slow, gentle smile. Of course, I said. I'll be observing. Carolyn blinked, completely thrown. It wasn't resistance, but it wasn't compliance either. It was just clarity. And as she walked away, unsettled, I knew something had changed. A minute later, Jordan passed my desk. He didn't stop, but as he walked by, he tapped twice against my desktop, a silent, solid signal. Asterisk, I see you. Keep steady. We move quiet. Asterisk, the spark wasn't loud. It didn't flare dramatic and bright. It was small, steady, reliable. The kind of spark that begins a controlled burn one, that methodically clears the old, dead brush to make space for something new to grow. That night, as the rain tapped against my window again, I opened my laptop. But I didn't open my documentation file. Not yet. Instead, I opened a blank one. At the top of the page, I typed, "This is the story of how they tried to make me small, and how I remembered that I was never meant to be." My fingers moved slowly at first, then faster. Then they became unstoppable. This wasn't a diary. It wasn't a complaint. It was a record, a testimony, a truth they could not soften, erase, or rewrite. Outside, Seattle shimmered with reflected city light, a place of glass, yes. But glass, once it cracks, does not return to what it was. And inside my chest, that quiet spark glowed, small, but growing. The days that followed settled into a quiet, deliberate rhythm. Maya no longer moved lightly through the office, hoping to fit into the edges of spaces that were never built for her. Instead, she walked with a steadiness that came from knowing where she stood, even if the ground around her was shifting. She documented everything: emails, comments, edits to her work, sudden meeting exclusions. Each detail was precise, dated, archived. Jordan had been right. The story they were crafting wasn't about one mistake or one conversation. It was about shaping a reputation that would follow her wherever her name appeared. And if they were building their version, she was building hers. The morning of the weekly strategy meeting arrived quietly. People gathered in the large glass conference room overlooking the city. It was the kind of view meant to inspire, though in practice it just reminded everyone how small they were compared to the skyline. Maya usually sat near the wall, silent, observing. But today she took a seat at the table, not aggressively, not defiantly, simply taking a seat that was hers by role and contribution. But she didn't say anything. The meeting began. Slides clicked through predictable corporate language. Growth projections, user conversion, strategic alignment. Caroline led the discussion, voice smooth but stretched thin. It was clear she didn't fully understand the numbers she was reciting. She spoke about trends as if they floated, disconnected from data. Maya watched, listened, measured. When Carolyn moved to the analysis section, the very one Maya had created, her voice wavered. One of the senior directors leaned forward. These projections seem conservative, much lower than last quarter's performance reports. Can you explain the reasoning? Carolyn hesitated. Her hand tightened around the remote. We adjusted the findings to ensure we weren't overestimating impact. We wanted to present something realistic and measured. The room was quiet. The director looked unconvinced. Who performed the analysis originally? He asked. Maya's heartbeat stayed calm, steady. Carolyn answered slowly. Maya did the initial draft? Initial? The director repeated. Yes, Caroline said, trying to maintain her tone. I refined the language to better reflect our communication style. Jordan, seated across the table this time, watched without blinking. The director leaned back. His voice was polite, but sharp in that way only power could afford. Maya, would you mind walking us through the rationale behind your original projections? The room turned, not dramatically, not abruptly, just turned. Caroline's jaw tightened. Her smile froze. Maya didn't rush. She calmly clicked to her version saved, time-stamped, ready. The graphs reappeared with clarity, the data strong and consistent. She explained her methodology with quiet precision, no embellishment. She spoke in the same tone she had used since her first day, confident, clear, grounded. The room listened. Because truth, when spoken plainly, rearranges the air. When she finished, there was a brief silence. Not uncomfortable considering. The director nodded slowly. This analysis makes significantly more sense. The revisions weakened the recommendations. I'd prefer we move forward with Maya's version. Carolyn spoke quickly. I was only trying to keep the tone from sounding too aggressive. We have to be careful not to overpromise. The director turned to her. Accuracy is not aggression. The sentence landed with quiet weight. Caroline swallowed. For once, she had no polished reply. The meeting continued, but the balance in the room had shifted. Conversations angled toward Maya now. Questions were directed to her. Space opened, not because they offered it, but because she had taken it with calm inevitability. After the meeting, the hallway buzzed with whispered conversation. People who had never acknowledged her before offered quick smiles. Too quick, too rehearsed. Not warmth, just recognition. The kind that comes when someone realizes they misjudged the gravity of the person in front of them. Caroline caught up to her near the elevators. Her voice was clipped, controlled. You blindsided me in there. Maya turned, not defensive, simply present. I answered a question that was addressed to me. You made me look unprepared. I didn't touch your edits. Maya said gently. You made yourself look unprepared. Caroline's expression flickered, not anger, but something more fragile. Fear. Because now she saw Maya clearly. Not an intern. Not a quiet girl from somewhere else. Not someone grateful to be included. A threat to the structure she depended on. Maya, Caroline said, voice low, this isn't how things work here. You have to understand the environment. You can't just... Maya stepped closer, not confrontational, simply impossible to ignore. I don't need to be smaller for you to feel like you belong, she said softly. Not cruel, not triumphant, just true. Caroline inhaled sharply and walked away. Jordan didn't approach immediately. He waited until the elevator doors closed, until the hallway was empty and quiet again. Then he spoke, voice low, steady, almost proud. You move differently today. Maya nodded once. I remembered who I am. A small smile curved at the corner of his mouth. Good. Keep remembering. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady, tapping the windows like a heartbeat. The confrontation hadn't been loud. It hadn't been dramatic, but it had changed the room. And everyone felt it. The battle was no longer invisible. It had begun. The morning after the meeting, the office buzzed with a quiet energy. It wasn't loud, not obvious, just a subtle shift in the way people moved, the way they held themselves. The air felt charged, like that moment of heavy stillness right before rain finally breaks open the sky. I could feel eyes on me, but not in the same way as before. These weren't the glances of avoidance, or the looks that dismissed me before I'd even spoken. These were glances of recognition, of recalculation. I didn't gloat. I didn't walk differently or try to force my presence into the room. I simply existed fully, unapologetically, in the space that had always been mine to begin with. I was in the break room, pouring myself a cup of tea, when I heard someone clear their throat softly behind me. Hey, Maya, right? I turned. A woman stood there, maybe in her mid-30s, with warm dark eyes and thick curls pulled into a loose bun. She wore a soft sweater, a stark contrast to the stiff corporate blazers everyone else seemed to wear like armor. There was something gentle about her, something real. I'm Nia, she said. I work in research and strategy. We're 2 floors up, so our paths don't cross much. I smiled. Nice to meet you. Nia returned the smile, and it was genuine, not polished for office politics. I was in the meeting yesterday, she said. You presented with such clarity and grace. That's not easy in a room like that. I didn't know what to say at first. Compliments in this building usually came wrapped in comparison or caution, like a gift with strings attached. But this one didn't. It just existed whole and warm. Thank you, I said quietly. Nia nodded, leaning one hip against the counter, making the space feel more like a kitchen than a corporate break room. Listen, I want you to know something. What happened yesterday? That wasn't new. Caroline has done that before. To others. And she's not the only one. She paused, her eyes meeting mine with a deep understanding. Sometimes the harm here doesn't come in shouts or insults. It comes in edits, in the tone of an email. Being left off a meeting invitation. You know that. I can tell. My breath settled. To be seen like that, without having to explain or justify my feelings, it felt like exhaling after holding air in my lungs for far too long. I know, I answered. Nia's voice lowered, becoming more conspiratorial, more intimate. People don't talk about it because they're afraid. Afraid of being labeled difficult, emotional, uncooperative, you know, the kind of labels that stick. She paused again, and the silence between us was gentle, shared, not empty. I didn't say anything when it happened to me, she admitted, and I regretted that for a long time. I looked into Nia's eyes and saw something honest, not pity or projection, but recognition. It was a survivor recognizing another survivor. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Really? Nia smiled again, this time with a warmth that reached her eyes. I'm having lunch with a few folks today. It's not a clique, just people who breathe. If you want to join, there's a seat for you. I hesitated for a second, not out of doubt, but out of sheer unfamiliarity. It had been a long time since anyone had offered me a seat at their table. I nodded. I'd like that. The cafe was a few blocks away, a little haven tucked between a bookstore and a florist. It was the kind of place with mismatched chairs, plants in every corner, and music that hummed softly instead of shouting for attention. Real sunlight streamed through the windows, a welcome change from the fluorescent white of the office. It felt like oxygen. 3 others were already there when Nia and I arrived. Jordan was one of them. He lifted his chin slightly in greeting, a gesture that felt subtle and familiar. The others introduced themselves. Luis, a UX designer with ink-stained fingers, and a quiet, easy laugh. And Marisol, a product manager with warm brown skin and earrings shaped like tiny suns. They didn't rush me. They didn't interrogate me about the meeting or make me perform my pain for entry into their circle. They simply ate. They talked. They shared space. They joked about the Seattle rain, about overly enthusiastic HR emails, and about living too far from family. It was just normal conversation yet. Somehow, it felt like healing. At one point, Marisol said something that hit me right in the chest. Everyone thinks diversity means posters and workshops. But real diversity is knowing someone else in the room understands when you say, "I'm tired," and "You're not talking about physical sleep." Everyone at the table nodded. And in that moment, I felt something loosen inside me. A knot I hadn't even realized was there began to unspool slowly, carefully. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. As we walked back to the office, the sidewalk glistening with leftover drizzle, Jordan fell into step beside me. The wet pavement reflected the sky like a soft, fragile mirror. "You handled yourself well today," he said, his voice calm and steady. I looked ahead at the towering glass building we were returning to. I wasn't trying to perform. "I know," Jordan replied. "That's why it worked. Truth doesn't need theatrics." I let out a quiet laugh. "You speak like someone who's thought about this way too much." His smile was small, but knowing. "You don't get to survive in a place like this without thinking." We walked in silence for a moment, the comfortable kind that means you no longer have to guard your every breath, your every thought. Then Jordan added, "You found your people today. Keep them close, this place. It moves differently when you're not isolated." I nodded. I understood completely. This wasn't just about fighting injustice or pushing back against a toxic culture. It was about belonging, even in a place that seemed determined to insist I didn't. That was the real rebellion. Not anger, not defiance, but connection. Finding each other, holding ground together, making space where none was given. A circle had formed around me, quiet, steady, and real. And circles, once they're formed, are very, very hard to break. The next few weeks moved quietly, the way storms gather before anyone notices the wind has changed. Maya continued her work with calm precision, documenting everything, meeting deadlines, staying steady. The small circle she had found at the cafe became part of her daily rhythm. They didn't talk strategy or revenge. They didn't need to. Presence was its own power. But the company moved too. Meetings went forward without her. Email chains were started where her name was intentionally missing. One-on-one check-ins were suddenly scheduled with HR under the guise of support. Each action was subtle enough to deny if questioned, but sharp enough to feel. It was clear. They were rebuilding the narrative. Quiet erasure. One afternoon, Maya was called to a meeting with senior leadership, the same conference room with the wide city view. She walked there without fear, not because she felt safe, but because she was done being small. Caroline was already inside. Her expression was serene, but her eyes flickered with anticipation. The director sat at the head of the table. HR representatives were there, not smiling. A display screen flickered with slides prepared in advance. Caroline spoke first, her tone smooth and measured. She began presenting a case, concerns about Maya's collaboration, tone, integration. She used phrases like pattern observed and team discomfort. She spoke about professionalism and fit. She spoke about cohesion and alignment. She spoke like someone certain they were winning. When she finished, the director turned to Maya. "Maya, you may respond." The room was quiet enough to hear breath. Maya did not raise her voice. She did not defend her worth. She simply opened her laptop and turned the screen toward the table. She had everything. Time-stamped reports, original versions, edited versions, email threads, meeting records, missing calendar invites, notes from performance conversations, small details, clear patterns. It was not loud. It was undeniable. She explained nothing at first. She simply let the silence settle over the numbers and timelines projected on the screen. Then she spoke. "I have never raised my voice here. I have never disrespected anyone here. I have contributed consistently and with dedication. The adjustments made to my work were not corrections. They were erasures. They were part of a pattern designed to reshape perception and weaken my credibility. I documented every instance because I understood what was happening long before today." She paused, letting her breath fill her chest with steadiness, not emotion. "I am not asking to be believed. I am asking for the truth to be seen." Jordan entered the room then. Not dramatically, just quietly, carrying a printed packet. The director had requested his perspective separately. He handed the packet to the director and sat. Inside were his logs of system changes, review timestamps, version history metadata showing when and by whom edits were actually made. Not assumptions, not feelings. Proof. The director reviewed everything silently. His expression sharpened. HR shifted uncomfortably. Caroline's face began to lose its practiced calm. She tried to speak, but the director raised his hand gently, stopping her. "Caroline," he said, voice firm and level, "did you alter these reports and present them as original?" Caroline swallowed, then tried to recover. "I refined them for tone. I was guiding development." She was not ready to handle external-facing deliverables independently. The director shook his head. Guidance does not require removal of accuracy, and professionalism does not require silencing confidence. He closed the folder. The room was still. Caroline's voice cracked. "So what are you saying?" The director spoke softly, without anger, without spectacle. "I am saying that your leadership decisions were not in the best interest of the team or the company." Caroline stared at Maya, not with hatred, but with realization. The mask she had worn for so long did not crack violently. It simply slipped away, leaving a tired, frightened woman who had built her identity on control. Security was not called. Voices did not rise. No one gloated. It was quiet, sad, final. Caroline was walked out that same afternoon, not with humiliation, just removal of power. The kind of ending that leaves no room for return. The company did not apologize. Companies rarely do. But the narrative changed. Meetings included Maya again. Her work was acknowledged, not praised dramatically, but recognized in the way that matters, with respect. Nia hugged her outside the cafe that weekend. Jordan simply nodded at her on the walk back to the office, which meant far more than congratulations ever could. Maya did not feel triumphant. She felt steady. She had not won a war. She had reclaimed herself. The city outside remained gray. The rain still came softly, but the glass buildings did not feel cold anymore. They felt like something she could walk through without disappearing. She did not stay at the company forever. 1 year later, she left on her own terms. Another team recruited her for her clarity, her leadership, her presence. They did not ask her to shrink. And in every room she walks into now, she carries that quiet strength, the kind that never has to announce itself. Because once you stop shrinking, you cannot return to smallness. Maya didn't become louder. She simply became unshakable. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach others who may need them today. And I would truly appreciate hearing your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what part spoke to you, what you felt, or what you took from it. Your voice matters here. Thank you for being part of this journey.